We now turn to covering the R code that comes along with Chapter 1. The way this is going to proceed throughout this material, this is a 14 chapter, I guess, air quote book, although it's online and broken down into parts. I have developed what I call the QF repository, or Quantitative Finance Repository. I encourage you to build your own repository, perhaps use the initials of your name or something that identifies you. And then you can begin to categorize the different programs, functional programs that you can rely on to build code in the future. If I look into Chapter 1, there are two modules that we'll be covering: the program layout as well as heating degree days. These are extremely elementary programming, and I want to remind you that my objective is not to present state-of-the-art complex R coding techniques. Rather, it's my intention to present very elementary R, so that if you're a novice, you can begin actually building programs that work in a very short period of time. If we look at the program layout module, if you'll notice, there are three different types of files in here. This file right here was actually generated with R Markdown, something that we'll cover later. So I'm going to delete that particular file, not to cause any confusion. And so in this particular program, there are three files, two types. RPROJ is the program file that stores all the specific options that have been selected for this particular program. And then there's the program layout, as well as an introductory appendix. I'm not going to spend time going through the appendix. It just goes through a whole host of different functions and techniques. If you're brand new to R, I recommend that you spend some time with this particular program. Once you've installed RStudio, if you just double click on this particular program, which by way of reminder, this source code is available at robertebrooks.org. If you click on the educational projects and then the building quantitative finance applications with R, you will find this material available at the bottom of the page that describes this particular book. The program layout program is very, very short, and this pound symbol, basically the fact that this is in green, tells me that these are comments. If you'll notice in the environment window, there's a variable left over, and so I'm going to be referring to taking out the trash, and taking out the trash is just clearing this out so that we start with a blank format. Eventually we'll automate this. If I click the run button, what this basically does is it runs the current line, but comment lines are not counted, so it jumps down to library base. The base library is already loaded, and so under packages, if you look, the fact that is checked lets me know that the base package is already loaded. It was loaded prior to this. If for some reason it got unloaded, I could actually it doesn't allow you to unload the base, so don't worry about that. I could load the stats package, which is there are several packages that are automatically loaded, and that's one of them, the stats package. And then RCPP is a package that links C++ code to RStudio. I'm not going to be going into that in this particular material, but if you happen to want to run some C++ code, there is a capacity with a package RCPP to make that connection. If I require that package, if you'll notice, RCPP gets checked. If I don't really know what that is, I can enter the command quote RCPP, and if you'll notice under the help, I get an introduction to RCPP. Typically, this help window is very brief, very cryptic. From where I sit, it appears to be written for professional programmers and difficult for entry-level students. And so I recommend that you go out to the internet, do a search on this particular package, and you'll end up at a variety of different websites that give you much more detail. The program R, it basically works with vectors, and so this is when x equals 100, basically there's a vector of size 1. The first element of that vector has the variable, the number 100 stored there. I could change it to 0. If you'll notice, there's two different ways to do equals. It turns out they are different depending on different applications. I'm going to tend to use line 30 for cases where I'm simply assigning variables. If I want to see what variable is actually, what values are contained in a particular variable, and I want to see it in the console window, I can go and just run x on line 34, and that gives me the value of x is currently sitting at 0. And that's all that this program does. So this is a fully functional program that really doesn't do a whole lot. If I wanted to switch over to module 1.2, there's a variety of different ways to do this. One way to do this, excuse me, is to just look at recent projects. And so because I've recently run it, it's sitting right there. But let's suppose that it's not there. I could just open a project, and it'll ask me, do I want to save the existing project? And typically I'll say yes. And then it'll ask me, where do I want to, what project do I want to open? And I want to open the one in the heating degree day section. And that'll open a new project. And again, it opens it where I recently left off. And so heating degree days is a simple program that reads in some data from a spreadsheet and eventually will produce a plot after we do a variety of different analyses on it. This is a line 8 is an example of taking out the trash, is the way I refer to this. If I run that line, if you'll notice, this environment is cleaned out. Oops, it was actually, the cursor was still down here from where I left it before. And so let me, if I go down here, I can do Command L on a Mac, Control L, I'm sorry, clear that out. I can come back up here, make sure the cursor is at line 1. If I run that, it takes out the trash here. I can look at the files document, and I notice that there is the CSV, comma separated variable, the ATL HDD, and so this is heating degree day variable from the Atlanta Hartsfield Airport. I can read that data in as a comma separated variable. It does have headers, so I'll read that in. If you'll notice, there's a data frame created that has these HDD file, this particular file name in line 12. I can click on the spreadsheet looking thing and look at what the data actually contains. And so it contains a date, it contains a HDD variable, and it has something called estimated, which is something we're not going to be referencing. Another way to see what I've actually brought in is heads and tails. And so if I just do heads, if you'll notice, it gives me the first 5 lines. If I do tail, it gives me the last 5 lines. If I want to know if what was read in as a data frame, I can do, is this a data frame? The answer is yes. Because this is a data frame, I can find out what the variables are, the variable types are. And if you'll notice, date is stored as a character. We can't do mathematical analysis on a character. The HDD is numeric, and the estimated data is integer. Another way to get that same information with just a little more to it is to do str HDD file. This gives me the type of variables as well as the first few observations, and that's very helpful. So another way to test variables is date is it numeric? Well, we know it's character, so the answer is no. Is it a factor? The answer is no. Factors, you can layer in different factors in a data frame. We won't get into that much here. Is HDD numeric? Well, yes, it is. Is estimated numeric? It is, even though it's stored as an integer. Is this ordered data based on factoring? The answer is no. Is the date variable character? Well, we know it is, and we can test it and see that it is. We can compute simple statistics like max and min of the estimated variable. Knowing that we're not going to use that variable, I can now eliminate it. If you'll notice over here in the environment, there are 3 variables. And so if I eliminate the estimated variable, then there's now only 2. And so I can look at it again. There's only these 2 variables. And so I could convert the date to character, which it already is. Is it a factor? No, it's not. Is it a character? Yes, it is. That wasn't helpful at all. However, I can convert from character to a date format using this variable, and now I have a variable that's formatted as a date. Is the date integer? No. Can I convert the character as an integer? No. But can I convert a date, which is now stored in Julian form? The answer is yes. And so these are Julian numbers, something we'll get into a whole lot more. RStudio's storage of dates is very confusing. And so if I'm using this as date conversion, notice capital D and the base package, the base date is January 1st, 1970. And what we see is that is the base year. I can look at what we now have, and I can actually produce a plot. And so this was an extremely brief introduction to RStudio and how to actually program in R. If we quickly jump back to the program layout that we looked at previously, we could, if we wanted to. I don't want to take the time to actually go there, but there is this appendix, and this appendix just has an enormous number of things that you can explore. For example, generating a random number, and so this particular package does a whole host of things that you might find interesting. Some of them I expect you will not understand. And so, but the time has come. If you want to move up as a quantitative financial analyst, if you're seeking to learn R, I recommend that you spend some time in the R programming. The best tip I can give you is that R is best learned the same way you learned soccer. It is not learned well the way you learned algebra. Specifically, learning to code well in R means you spend time on the field. That is, you just a code. And so I recommend that you sit down about 1 hour a day, 3 to 5 days a week, and just play around with coding. Just like a language, over time you'll begin to develop your skills. And so this completes our videos related to Chapter 1. We turn next to Chapter 2, which is approaches to valuation. We'll look at 3 categories of approaches and some simple programming there.